The sun was just beginning to rise over the sleepy airfield near the village of Ashford in southern England. August 1943. I'm James Carter, Chief Aeronautical Engineer stationed at this remote RAF base, and that morning, I was about to face a reality that would shake me to my core. We just received word that an American P-47 Thunderbolt had been forced down after a dogfight over the channel. The pilot was captured, and, incredibly, the aircraft itself was largely intact. This was a jackpot for us. For months, we'd heard stories from our pilots about this lumbering American beast. The flying milk bottle, they called it. Clumsy-looking, unwieldy, a flying brick compared to our sleek Spitfires and Hurricanes. But now we had one on our tarmac, and I was tasked with figuring out what made it tick. When I first saw it up close, I had to stifle a laugh. The P-47 was enormous, looking about as aerodynamic as a bathtub with wings. Its bulky fuselage was built around a massive radial engine that seemed almost cartoonishly oversized. The contrast with our nimble fighters was stark. I half expected it to tip over like a clumsy toddler learning to walk. But that was just appearances. And appearances, I was learning, could be deceiving. I grabbed my notebook and started my meticulous examination. The engine was a Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp, an 18-cylinder beast arranged in two neat rows. It was a masterpiece of engineering, every part machined with a precision that made my own factory's efforts look like child's play. I scribbled furiously as I calculated its horsepower, at least 2,000, maybe even more with that turbocharger system I spotted tucked into the fuselage. To put it into perspective, our Rolls-Royce Merlin engines in the Spitfires churned out around 1,500 horsepower, and even then we were pushing them to their limits. This American engine was a monster, built with high-grade alloys, no shortcuts, no compromises. It was like comparing a luxury sports car to a battered old jalopy. One of my assistants, a sharp-eyed mechanic named Sarah, who had a way of making even engine parts sound sexy, pointed out the cylinders. "Look at this, James. Each one's removable on its own. If one's damaged, you just swap it out without pulling apart the whole engine." I nodded, impressed despite myself. "Brilliant design," I muttered. "Faster repairs, more uptime. Our fighters? One damaged cylinder and you might as well kiss the aircraft goodbye." But then I saw it, the real secret. The turbo supercharger. A complex web of ducting snaked through the plane, channeling exhaust gases to a turbine at the rear, spinning at insane speeds and forcing compressed air back into the engine. I'd read about this, but seeing it in person was something else entirely. Our engineers had tried similar technology, but it was unreliable, fragile, and impossible to mass produce. This system meant the P-47 could keep full power high above 25,000 feet, where our fighters were gasping for air. It was a game changer. Sarah asked quietly, "Can we build something like this?" I shook my head, feeling a knot in my stomach. "Not with what we have. This requires precision machining, rare alloys, and skilled labor we just don't have. It's beyond us." I looked back at the flying milk bottle sitting there, this ungainly giant that seemed to mock everything we knew about aircraft design. But it wasn't just its engineering that troubled me. I saw the battle scars, holes from cannon shells, riddled wings, and yet it had flown back, landing safely. Our fighters would have been shredded. The P-47 was built like a tank, heavy and tough. Thick armor protected the pilot, the cockpit glass was like a bank vault window, and that radial engine? It wasn't just for power, it was a shield. You could shoot cylinders off it and it would keep running. I jotted down notes. Overbuilt, over-engineered, but they can afford it. They have the engines to carry the extra weight. We don't. Our design philosophy was all wrong. We chased every last bit of speed and agility because we lacked the power to carry more weight. They just brute-forced their way with sheer industrial muscle. And that muscle was growing stronger every month. Later, I examined the 8.50 caliber machine guns mounted in the wings. Each had hundreds of rounds, 3,200 total. The firepower was terrifying. A single 2-second burst would unleash 200 rounds at over 100 rounds per second. Our fighters carried fewer guns, less ammo. Their fire was more precise but limited. The Thunderbolt just sprayed death in a cone and let brute force do the rest. I realized then that our pilots had no chance in a prolonged fight against these giants. We needed new tactics, hit and run, avoid head-on fights at high altitude, but even those felt like band-aids on a sinking ship. As I compiled my report for command, the numbers made my head spin. The Americans were producing these monsters faster than we could dream of building our entire fighter force. Their factories were churning out over 500 P-47s a month, with plans to push even higher. Our combined fighter production barely matched that. And the engines, over 125,000 are 2,800s built during the war. More than all our engines combined. I sat back, staring at my notes. Germany wasn't losing because of tactics or bravery. We were losing because of factories, steel, and raw materials. The war wasn't just in the skies, it was in the workshops, the assembly lines. When I handed my report over, my commanding officer gave me a look that said it all. This wasn't going to go down well in Berlin. I braced myself. The truth was dangerous. And in times like these, truth was a luxury no one could afford. The smell of cold metal and engine oil hung thick in the dimly lit hangar as I leaned closer to the P-47's fuselage, my fingers tracing the smooth rivets and reinforced panels. The airfield outside was quiet, but inside, my mind was racing faster than any engine. I was James Carter, an engineer trained to find answers, yet the answers I was uncovering felt like a ticking bomb. Sarah stood nearby, her dark hair pulled back into a loose bun, strands escaping to frame her sharp, alert eyes. She wore a fitted navy blue jumpsuit that clung to her in all the right places, the collar casually undone, revealing a silver chain resting just above her collarbone, a subtle contrast to the grime on her hands. Her confident grin was the kind that could disarm a squadron commander. But tonight, there was worry beneath it. "James, come see this," she called softly, nodding toward the wing's interior. We crouched beside the thick aluminum skin, peppered with tiny puncture marks from enemy fire. "Look here," she said, pulling out a small flashlight and illuminating the complex web of internal braces and reinforcements. "This is no lightweight design. They've layered the frame like armor plating. It's like a battleship wrapped around a fighter." I nodded slowly, the weight of it sinking in. Our British and German fighters prized speed and maneuverability, making sacrifices in armor to stay light. But this American behemoth? It was built to survive, to shrug off punishment that would send our planes spiraling to the ground. I pulled my notebook closer and sketched the internal frame, noting the overlapping beams and redundancy in control cables. They've doubled up on everything. Control surfaces have backup lines just in case. Even if one system fails, the pilot keeps flying. Sarah smirked. "Bet their pilots sleep better at night." I chuckled softly, but the joke didn't mask the truth gnawing at me. This plane was a fortress, a flying tank that could take a beating and still return home. And it wasn't just the armor. It was the design philosophy baked into every inch of the aircraft. I glanced up at Sarah, her sleeves rolled up, revealing toned forearms smeared with grease, and felt a pang of admiration mixed with unease. We were fighting a battle not just in the skies but in the factories, the workshops, and the minds of men like her and me. My thoughts were interrupted by the sharp clack of boots on the metal floor. Commander Hastings entered the hangar, his crisp uniform spotless despite the early hour. His steely blue eyes scanned the P-47, then locked onto me. "Mr. Carter," he said, voice low but firm. "Your report." I handed over the folder, watching as his expression darkened with every page. "This isn't what they want to hear," he muttered, "but it's what they need." He looked out toward the runway, where the morning mist curled around the Thunderbolt's massive silhouette. "Our boys call it the flying milk bottle," he said dryly. "But it's more like a steel jug full of fury." I smiled despite myself. "Yes, sir. It's a weapon of industrial might, not just aerodynamics." Hastings shook his head. "I'll make sure the brass sees it. But be warned, James. These truths can be dangerous. The higher-ups prefer the comforting lie to the bitter fact." I swallowed the lump forming in my throat. "I understand, sir." As he left, I turned back to the P-47, the engines humming silently, an ominous reminder of the invisible war raging beyond the front lines. The war of production, resources, and willpower. Later that day, Sarah and I pored over the ammunition specs. The 8.50 caliber machine guns were a staggering sight, 3,200 rounds in total. The sheer volume of firepower was almost obscene. "Imagine facing that," Sarah whispered, biting her lip. "One wrong move, and you're shredded." I couldn't help but picture her, fierce and fearless, gripping a wrench instead of a gun, knowing the fate of pilots depended on the machines we built and maintained. The afternoon sun filtered through the hangar windows, casting long shadows over the Thunderbolt's polished surfaces. I felt a cold certainty settle over me. This was no ordinary aircraft. It was a symbol of a terrible truth, that the war was shifting, and we were losing the fight not in the skies, but in factories thousands of miles away. As dusk approached, I locked eyes with Sarah one last time. "We need to be ready for what's coming," I said quietly. She nodded, a flicker of steel in her gaze. "Then let's make sure we're not caught flat-footed." But as I left the hangar, I couldn't shake the feeling that the real battle was just beginning. And somewhere in the shadows of power, decisions were being made that could seal our fate. What if this was just the tip of the iceberg? What secrets lay hidden in the American war machine that we hadn't even glimpsed yet? The night swallowed those questions, leaving only the hum of the captured P-47 and the cold, relentless truth echoing in my mind. The next morning, the airfield was alive with a nervous energy that felt almost electric. I was back in the hangar before dawn, the cold metal of the P-47's frame cool beneath my fingertips. James Carter, that's me, the man tasked with unraveling the secrets of this American juggernaut, and the weight of that responsibility was pressing heavier than ever. Sarah was already there, leaning against a workbench, a cigarette dangling from her lips. Her navy jumpsuit was unzipped a little more than usual, revealing just a hint of lace from a camisole beneath. She took a long drag and flicked the ash into a battered tin ashtray. "You look like you haven't slept," she said, voice low and teasing. "Or maybe you've seen a ghost." "Worse?" I muttered, rubbing my eyes. "I've seen the future, and it's not looking good." Today was the day we'd start tearing into the turbo supercharger system, the heart of the P-47's high-altitude dominance. It was a complex piece of engineering, a serpent of gleaming pipes and turbines tucked deep inside the aircraft's belly. Our British fighters struggled to breathe up high. This system was the Americans' secret weapon. I pulled out my tools, the familiar weight grounding me. "If we can understand this, maybe we can find a way to counter it." Sarah smiled, that mischievous glint lighting up her eyes. "Or maybe we just blow it up and hope they don't build another." I laughed, but the joke felt thin. As we worked, I caught myself stealing glances at her. Her hands deftly maneuvering wrenches, the way her sleeves clung to her toned arms, the soft curve of her neck as she leaned in close to inspect a pipe. There was an unspoken tension between us, a shared understanding that this war was bigger than either of us. But we were caught in its grip. The turbocharger was a marvel. Exhaust gases powered a turbine spinning at over 20,000 revolutions per minute, forcing compressed air into the engine, giving it power where thinner air would leave others gasping. Every inch of the system was built with precision and care, using alloys and manufacturing techniques that were well beyond what we could replicate back home. I traced the ducting with my fingers, feeling heat radiate from the metal even now. They're not just building planes. They're building miracles. Sarah wiped grease from her brow and smirked. And here we are, trying to patch up Spitfires with spit and hope. Suddenly, the radio crackled to life. "Carter, this is Base Command. You're to prepare an urgent briefing for senior officers this afternoon. They want your full assessment on the P-47's capabilities and implications for our tactics." I swallowed hard. The truth was out, and it was about to be laid bare for those in charge. But I knew the reception wouldn't be warm. Later, in the briefing room, I stood before a group of high-ranking officers, their uniforms immaculate, their faces masks of skepticism and impatience. I laid out the facts, the engine's power, the turbocharger's sophistication, the rugged airframe, and the devastating firepower. One gruff colonel scoffed. You expect us to believe this lumbering milk bottle is superior to our sleek fighters? It's crude American engineering, no match for our precision. I met his gaze steadily. With respect, sir, the numbers don't lie. Their industrial capacity is overwhelming. They're producing hundreds of these every month, while we struggle to build a fraction of that. Another officer, younger and less polished, whispered to his neighbor, "Defeatist talk." I fought the urge to respond. This wasn't about pride or bravado. It was survival. As the meeting ended, Commander Hastings pulled me aside. "Brace yourself, James. This report will ruffle feathers. Some will see it as defeatism, others as dangerous truth." Walking back across the airfield, the evening sun casting long shadows, I felt the bitter taste of isolation. I was an engineer, a man of facts, but in this war, facts were sometimes the enemy. Sarah caught up with me near the hangar, her expression softer now. "Don't let them get to you. You're the only one seeing what's really coming." I nodded, grateful for her faith. If only they'd listen. Her hand brushed mine briefly, a fleeting touch charged with unspoken promises and fears. The P-47 sat silently behind us, a looming reminder that the war was no longer about dogfights or daring pilots. It was about factories, resources, and the unyielding march of steel and fire. And somewhere deep inside me, a question burned. Could we change course before it was too late? But that question, like the turbocharger's hidden power, remained locked away, waiting for the right moment to explode into the light. The dawn broke cold and gray over the quiet town of Ashford, casting long shadows across the airfield where the P-47 sat like a sleeping giant. I, James Carter, found myself drawn back to the captured fighter, the weight of its secrets pressing on me like the heavy morning fog. Each time I looked at that bulky frame, I saw not just a plane, but a symbol of a war we were losing in 1,000 silent ways. That morning, I was joined by another member of our team, Dr. Elizabeth "Liz" Harper, a materials specialist with a sharp mind and an even sharper wit. She was the kind of woman who could make the dullest metal analysis sound like a spy thriller. Dressed in a tailored gray blouse rolled up at the sleeves, tight black trousers, and sturdy boots, she exuded a confidence that made me momentarily forget the grim purpose of our work. A delicate silver locket hung around her neck, catching the pale light as she leaned over the wing to examine the aluminum skin. "James," she said without looking up, "if these alloys are as pure as they seem, it means the Americans have a raw materials pipeline that makes our best factories look like children playing with tin cans." I nodded grimly. "Exactly. Their aluminum's lighter, stronger. No rationing here, no cutting corners." Liz grinned, flashing a mischievous smile. "Meanwhile, we're patching up Spitfires with whatever scraps we can scavenge. It's like bringing a butter knife to a gunfight." As we worked, Liz pulled out a small portable microscope and focused on the surface of the wing. "Look here," she said, pointing to an area battered by cannon fire. "See how the metal's layered? Multiple sheets bonded together, distributing the impact. It's no wonder this plane comes back after being riddled with holes." I traced the dented panel with my gloved hand, feeling a strange mix of awe and dread. These weren't just machines. They were masterpieces forged in the relentless fires of industry and necessity. Suddenly, the silence was broken by a sharp whistle from Sarah, who had joined us, wiping grease from her hands. She was looking at the cockpit, where thick armored glass shielded the pilot's seat like a bank vault. That windshield alone could stop a bullet. Our fighter's glass is practically paper in comparison. I glanced at Sarah, admiring how her dark eyes sparkled with fierce intelligence beneath a smudge of oil. Her fitted jumpsuit clung to her curves, the collar framing her strong neck, and despite the grime, there was an effortless allure about her, like a storm disguised as sunshine. "We've been fighting ghosts," I muttered, "chasing an enemy built not just to fight, but to endure." Liz laughed softly. "Ghosts? More like juggernauts. And they're coming for us." The three of us stood in silence for a moment, the weight of that reality settling over us like a shroud. Later that afternoon, I found myself alone in the briefing room again, preparing my next report. The figures were staggering. American production outpacing ours by more than 3-to-1. Engines like the R-2800 being built in automotive plants converted to war factories. Thousands of skilled workers replaced by machines humming around the clock. I thought of the pilots flying into battle, trusting these machines to keep them alive, while our own fighters crept toward obsolescence. A sudden knock startled me. Commander Hastings entered, his face drawn but resolute. "James," he said quietly, "the brass have read your reports. They're resistant. Some say you're giving up before the fight's even begun." I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not giving up, sir. I'm telling the truth. Ignoring it won't change the facts." He sighed deeply. "Truth has a way of making powerful men uncomfortable. Be careful which battles you choose." As he left, I felt a chill that wasn't from the drafty windows. That evening, Sarah and I sat outside the hangar, sharing a flask of whiskey beneath a sky heavy with stars. The night air was cool, sharp with the scent of fuel and distant rain. She looked at me, eyes reflecting the flickering light. "You ever get the feeling we're fighting a losing game?" I shrugged, swallowing the burn of the whiskey. "Every day." Her laugh was soft, almost bitter. "Well, at least we've got each other in this madhouse." I reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face. "We'll find a way, Sarah. We have to." But as the night deepened, so did the shadows around us, and I couldn't shake the sense that the real battle, the one that would decide everything, was far from the airfield, hidden in factories, boardrooms, and minds unwilling to face the truth. A sudden crack of thunder rolled across the sky, as if the heavens themselves were warning us. The storm was coming, and no one would be safe. And somewhere, deep within the cold heart of the P-47, secrets waited to be uncovered. Secrets that could change the course of the war, or seal our doom. The morning mist still clung to the fields around Ashford as I arrived at the airfield, my coat pulled tight against the chill. The P-47 sat there, its bulky silhouette framed by the soft light, almost serene in its menace. I was James Carter, aeronautical engineer, and every day felt like walking a tightrope between cold facts and the storm of denial swirling in the corridors of power. Today, I was joined by another visitor. A man whose presence unsettled me more than the grinding reality of war. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Wallace, a sharp-eyed intelligence officer with a reputation for skepticism and a penchant for cutting through nonsense with a razor wit. Dressed in an impeccably tailored uniform, his polished boots tapping briskly on the concrete, he carried himself with the kind of confidence that made you wonder if he believed in fate, or simply made it happen. "Carter," he greeted, his voice crisp. "I hear you've been poking around the flying milk bottle. Care to enlighten me on what you've found?" I gestured toward the massive radial engine, its cylinders gleaming under the hangar lights. "Lieutenant Colonel, this engine alone outclasses anything we have. The R-2800 produces over 2,000 horsepower, with a turbocharger system that maintains power at altitudes where our fighters struggle to breathe." Wallace raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you're describing a beast. But what about practicality? Can we counter it?" I sighed. "That's the problem. Their industrial capacity lets them build these beasts by the hundreds, while we scrape together scraps to keep our squadrons flying. The P-47 is rugged, powerful, and heavily armed. 8.50 caliber machine guns with thousands of rounds, enough to turn any target into shredded metal." He chuckled dryly. "Sounds like the American answer to our Spitfires, but bigger, louder, and more stubborn. I suppose you don't have a miracle solution." I shook my head. "Not yet, but understanding it is the first step." Wallace studied the plane, then turned to Sarah, who had joined us, wiping grease from her hands. Her dark eyes met his unflinchingly, the faint smirk playing on her lips betraying her confidence. "Your mechanic's got guts," he said. "I like that." Sarah shrugged, a teasing glint in her gaze. "Someone's got to keep the wheels turning." We moved around the aircraft, Wallace asking pointed questions while I explained the engineering marvels and the sobering realities. The turbocharger system, the layered armor, the over-engineered airframe, it was a testament to American industrial might and their willingness to trade finesse for brute strength. Later, in the dim light of the briefing room, Wallace leaned closer. You know, Carter, some folks in London don't want to hear how far behind we are. They'd rather believe it's a matter of tactics, not factories. I nodded grimly. I fear they're wrong. This isn't just an arms race. It's a race of machines and manpower we're losing. He smirked. Well, if the brass won't listen, maybe we need to make them. That evening, as I walked back across the airfield, the cold biting through my coat, I couldn't shake the feeling that Wallace's words held a dangerous truth. The war wasn't just fought in the skies. It was fought in whispered meetings, in reports filed and ignored, in the stubborn refusal to face the facts. Sarah caught up with me near the hangar, her jumpsuit stained but her spirit unbroken. You thinking what I'm thinking? I looked at her, the weight of the day heavy in my chest. That maybe it's time to stop waiting for permission to tell the truth. She smiled, a spark of defiance in her eyes. Then let's make some noise. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting the airfield in a fiery glow, I realized that the real battle was no longer just about planes or pilots. It was about courage, the courage to face uncomfortable truths, to challenge the comfortable lies, and to fight not just with bullets, but with facts. And somewhere in the shadows, the question lingered. Could a handful of determined men change the course of a war that seemed already lost? Or were we merely delaying the inevitable? The early morning fog hung low over Ashford Airfield as I stepped into the cramped briefing room, my heart pounding with a mixture of dread and determination. I'm James Carter, engineer, reluctant messenger of inconvenient truths, and today was the day I would present my findings to a wider audience. Men whose faces I barely knew, but who held the fate of thousands in their hands. The room was filled with officers in stiff uniforms, their eyes sharp, their skepticism sharper. Among them was General Matthews, a man known for his rigid adherence to tradition and a reputation for crushing dissent. His steel-gray eyes locked onto me the moment I began. I cleared my throat and began, detailing the P-47's monstrous Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, the turbocharger system that kept it roaring at altitudes where our Spitfires gasped for breath, and the aircraft's impenetrable armor. I described the staggering firepower of its 8.50 caliber machine guns, the relentless industrial capacity behind its production, and the grim reality that we were outmatched not just in the skies but in factories and resources. As I spoke, I noticed the general's jaw tightening, his fingers drumming a silent rhythm on the polished oak table. When I finished, the room was silent, too silent. General Matthews finally spoke, his tone icy. Mr. Carter, your report paints a bleak picture. Are you suggesting we accept defeat? No, sir, I replied firmly. I'm saying we must adapt, recognize the enemy's strengths, adjust our tactics, and focus on innovation. Ignoring these facts won't make them disappear. A younger officer scoffed. Sounds like defeatism to me. I met his gaze steadily. It's realism, and realism is the first step toward victory. General Matthews leaned forward. The Führer expects optimism, not pessimism. Your report will be filed and reviewed. The words hit me like a punch. Filed and reviewed, a polite way of saying ignored. Later, as I left the building, the weight of the encounter pressed down. The machinery of war was vast and unyielding, and truth was often the first casualty. Back at the hangar, Sarah awaited, her eyes sharp beneath her grease-streaked face. How did it go? I sighed. They'll file it away, call it defeatist, and carry on as before. She shook her head, a wry smile tugging at her lips. Well, we're not filing this away, are we? I shook my head. No. We have to find other ways to get the truth out, to prepare our pilots, to save lives. That night, under a sky heavy with stars, I sat alone in the dim glow of my quarters, poring over production figures and tactical reports. The numbers were brutal, American factories churning out planes and engines at a pace we couldn't dream of matching. Their designs forgiving, durable, and lethal. A knock at the door startled me. Sarah slipped inside, closing it quietly behind her. Her eyes held a fire that matched my own uncertainty. We can't wait for permission anymore, she said. We have to act. I nodded. Tomorrow I'll speak with Wallace again. Maybe together we can break through the wall of denial. She smiled, stepping closer. And if that fails? I met her gaze, the weight of the war between us. Then we fight in the shadows. Outside, the wind whispered secrets through the trees, carrying with it the distant roar of aircraft engines. A reminder that the war was far from over, and the stakes had never been higher. And deep within the steel heart of the P-47, the secrets we'd uncovered pulsed like a ticking clock, counting down to a reckoning none of us could yet foresee. The morning sun filtered weakly through the grimy windows of the Ashford Airfield briefing room, casting long shadows over the assembled faces. Faces etched with fatigue, doubt, and a stubborn pride that refused to yield. I was James Carter, standing once more before the men who held the power to shape the skies, armed only with facts that felt heavier than any bomb. Today's meeting was different. Lieutenant Colonel Richard Wallace had arranged it, a rare gathering of engineers, tacticians, and intelligence officers. The atmosphere was tense, a powder keg of skepticism and urgency. I began by laying out the grim realities once more. The P-47's monstrous Pratt & Whitney R2800 engine, its turbo supercharger that granted it near-superhuman altitude performance, and its armor that turned it into a flying tank. I spoke of production numbers that dwarfed our own, the relentless American industrial machine turning out hundreds of these fighters each month, fueled not just by steel and oil, but by a workforce that never seemed to tire. But this time I wasn't alone. Wallace stepped forward, his sharp eyes scanning the room. "Gentlemen," he said, voice calm but firm, "we face an enemy whose strength lies not just in the skies, but in their factories and resolve. Denial will not protect us. Adaptation will." A murmur rippled through the room. Some faces bore grudging respect. Others remained hard as flint. Sarah, standing at the back, caught my eye. Her gaze was steady, fierce, a reminder that behind these cold calculations were lives on the line. As the discussion unfolded, ideas emerged. New tactics to avoid head-on engagements with the Thunderbolt, increased emphasis on hit-and-run strikes, and urgent calls for accelerated research into turbocharger technology and more robust airframes. But the shadow of reality loomed large. The resources to realize these changes were scarce, and the political leadership resistant. Still, seeds of change had been planted. After the meeting, Wallace and I stepped outside into the chill afternoon air. "You did well," he said quietly. "This might be the start of something." I nodded, though doubt lingered. If only the powers that be would listen before it's too late. Sarah joined us, wiping grease from her hands yet standing tall. "We'll make them listen, one way or another." As dusk settled, I walked back to the P-47, its hulking form silhouetted against the fading light. I reached out, running a hand along its cold metal skin, imagining the fierce pilots who trusted their lives to this machine. A sudden crack of thunder echoed overhead, and I looked up to see dark clouds gathering. A storm was coming, both in the skies and within the halls of command. And somewhere deep inside that captured Thunderbolt, a secret waited, one that could turn the tide or seal our fate. But for now, all we had was determination, fragile and flickering, like a candle fighting the wind. The chill of early evening settled over Ashford Airfield as I stood alone beside the captured P-47, its hulking frame bathed in the soft glow of the setting sun. I'm James Carter, an engineer caught between the brutal realities of war and the desperate hope that our efforts might make a difference. Tonight, the air was thick with tension, both in the sky and in my mind. Sarah appeared quietly, slipping out from the shadows, her dark eyes reflecting the fading light. She wore her usual jumpsuit, sleeves rolled up to reveal strong, grease-streaked arms. The collar was undone just enough to hint at the curve of her neck, a subtle reminder that even amid war's harshness, life pressed stubbornly on. "Still thinking about the briefing?" she asked softly, lighting a cigarette with a practiced flick. The smoke curled upward, mingling with the cool night air. I nodded. I can't shake the feeling that we're running out of time. The P-47 isn't just a plane. It's a symbol of everything we're up against. She exhaled slowly, her gaze steady. Then let's make sure we don't lose the war before it's truly begun. We talked long into the night, sharing fears and plans, the flicker of a small lantern casting dancing shadows across the hangar walls. I found myself drawn to her. The way her lips curved when she smiled, the quiet strength in her voice, the way she moved with purpose even in the darkest moments. But beneath the camaraderie, a storm was brewing. Reports came in of increased American sorties, of Thunderbolts swarming the skies with ruthless efficiency. Our pilots were being pushed harder, losses mounting, morale fraying at the edges. The next day, I returned to the P-47 with a sense of urgency. I began cataloging every detail, the reinforced armor plating, the ease of maintenance designed into the engine, the sheer volume of ammunition the plane carried. Each discovery deepened my conviction that this aircraft was the embodiment of American industrial might and ingenuity. Yet, as I worked, a nagging question gnawed at me. How long before this knowledge would be buried again, dismissed as defeatist or dangerous? Suddenly, a distant rumble cut through the stillness, the unmistakable roar of aircraft engines. I looked up to see a squadron of P-47s streaking overhead, their silhouettes stark against the brightening sky. Sarah joined me, her expression hardening. They're everywhere now. I swallowed hard. And we're running out of time. As the Thunderbolts disappeared into the horizon, I realized the war was no longer just about tactics or bravery. It was about factories, resources, and the unyielding will to adapt. But amidst the growing storm, an unsettling thought took root. What if the greatest threat wasn't the enemy outside, but the silence within? The P-47 loomed behind us, silent and imposing, holding secrets that could change everything, or doom us all. And in the shadows, unseen hands were moving, shaping a future none of us could yet comprehend. The cold light of dawn crept over Ashford as I trudged toward the hangar, the weight of the past weeks pressing down on me like the morning mist. I'm James Carter, aeronautical engineer, and every day brings new evidence that the war we're fighting is slipping beyond our grasp. The captured P-47 Thunderbolt sat silent, its massive form a reminder of the industrial might arrayed against us. Inside the hangar, Sarah was already there, sleeves rolled up and hands stained with grease. Her sharp eyes caught mine as I entered, and for a moment, the world outside the war faded. "We've got reports," she said quietly. "More Thunderbolts inbound over the channel. They're pushing harder every day." I nodded grimly. "Our pilots don't stand a chance in a straight fight. We need to rethink everything, tactics, training, even the aircraft we build." Sarah wiped her hands on a rag, her gaze fierce. "And yet, the brass still clings to old ways. They don't want to hear it." I felt the bitter sting of truth. The higher-ups preferred hope to harsh reality, denial to adaptation. Meanwhile, the enemy's machines continued to pour from factories, relentless and unstoppable. As I studied the P-47's rugged frame, the layers of armor, the intricate turbocharger system, I realized this plane was more than metal and machinery. It was a message. The Americans had built a fighter that could take punishment, dish out destruction, and keep flying. It was a testament to a nation's industrial heart beating strong even in war. But inside me, a growing unease festered. The intelligence we'd gathered, the reports, the captured aircraft, the production numbers were all known to the top brass. Yet action was slow, sometimes non-existent. That night, Sarah and I met in secret, poring over blueprints and data, searching for any edge we could find. She leaned close, her breath warm against my ear as she whispered, "If they won't listen, we'll have to make them see." I caught her hand, fingers tightening. "We have to, for the pilots, for everyone." Outside, the distant thunder of engines echoed, a reminder that the skies were growing darker with every passing day. And in the shadows of power, decisions were being made that could change everything. The war was no longer just about planes or pilots. It was about truth, courage, and the desperate fight to be heard before it was too late. But as I looked at the P-47 once more, its silent promise looming large, I knew this was only the beginning. The final battle was yet to come, and its outcome would ripple far beyond the skies above Ashford. The air in the briefing room was thick with tension as I stood before the highest ranks of command once more. I'm James Carter, an engineer burdened with truths too heavy for comfortable ears. The captured P-47 Thunderbolt sat miles away, its secrets laid bare in my reports, yet the resistance to change remained stubborn and unyielding. Today, I presented my final assessment, a clear declaration that the industrial might behind the American war machine was overwhelming. I spoke of factories teeming with workers retooled for aircraft production, of engines like the R-2800 forged with automotive precision, of fighters built not just for speed but for resilience and firepower beyond measure. Faces around the room hardened. Some masked disbelief, others thinly veiled contempt. General Matthews, seated at the head of the table, fixed me with a cold stare. "Mr. Carter," he said slowly, "your report borders on defeatism. We will not surrender to fear." I met his gaze evenly. "This is not defeatism, sir. It is reality. Ignoring it will cost lives, thousands of them." A murmur rippled through the room. The war was no longer just a contest of skill and bravery. It was a crucible of industry and will. The P-47 was a symbol, a testament to an enemy whose production capacity and technological advances outpaced us at every turn. Yet, despite the truth laid bare, the decisions came slowly, burdened by pride and ideology. As I left the room, a bitter smile touched my lips. The report would be filed, classified, and likely shelved. The war would continue, choices made by those unwilling to face the harshest realities. Outside, the distant roar of aircraft engines filled the sky, a relentless reminder that the fight was far from over. Sarah joined me, her eyes fierce with quiet determination. "We did what we could." I nodded. "Sometimes that's all any of us can do." The captured P-47 loomed in the fading light, a silent sentinel holding the truth of a war far bigger than any one man. And as night fell over Ashford, I wondered what the future held. For the pilots, the engineers, and the countless souls caught in the storm of industry and war. The battle for the skies had been lost long before the first bullet flew. But the war itself, its true nature, was only beginning to reveal its darkest secrets. And somewhere, beyond the horizon, new machines waited to take flight, ready to turn the tide or to seal our fate.